They planted drugs in her trunk, dragged her into jail, my mom, and laughed like she was just another black woman too scared to fight back. But what if she wasn't? What happens when the woman they tried to frame is the one person who can take down their entire system from the inside? Let us know in the comments. What would you do if you knew the truth, but everyone else chose to look away? Hit like, share this story, and subscribe for more powerful tales like this. Now let's go back to that quiet night in Virginia, where it all began. It was close to midnight in Stafford, Virginia. The streets were hushed, empty, as if the town had exhaled and fallen asleep. Streetlights hummed quietly overhead, casting long silver streaks across the pavement. The occasional flicker from a porch light or the distant rustle of trees in the breeze were the only signs of life. It was the kind of night that felt too quiet, almost rehearsed. Raina Morgan sat behind the wheel of a black SUV, gliding through the neighborhood like a shadow. Her windows were rolled up, the air inside cool and still. She wore a simple olive green hoodie, faded jeans, and her hair pulled back in a low bun. To anyone watching, she might have looked like a woman coming back from a late shift or running an errand. Nothing special, nothing threatening. But behind her calm exterior, her eyes told a different story. She checked her rearview mirror again. Once, then twice, a habit, but tonight it felt more like instinct. There was no one behind her, no headlights for several blocks. Still, she kept glancing. Not out of fear. Raina didn't fear easily, but because after years in the field, she'd learned still waters aren't always safe ones. A small glint caught her eye, a stop sign at the next intersection. She eased off the gas, rolling to a smooth, complete stop. No jerking, no last-minute brakes. Her foot hovered, then tapped gently on the pedal. She held there for 3 full seconds, then signaled left. The street ahead was quiet. She turned. 2 blocks later, the red and blue flashed behind her. She didn't curse. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she exhaled slowly, hands still on the wheel, her voice barely audible in the stillness of the cabin. It begins. The squad car pulled in fast behind her lights, spinning silently now. No siren, no rush. Just enough presence to signal power and the expectation of submission. She pulled over with precision, guiding her vehicle to the curb. Her body moved fluidly, each gesture slow and measured. She turned off the engine, placed her hands visibly on the wheel, and waited. From her side mirror, she saw them exit the cruiser, 2 officers, one tall and rigid with a square jaw, the other shorter, rounder with a swagger in his step, like he'd already won something. Their movements were not rushed, they were choreographed, practiced. The tall one approached first, his flashlight already on, casting a beam that danced across her side window. Raina didn't squint. She didn't shield her eyes. She just turned her head calmly and looked up at him through the glass. Her eyes didn't plead. They didn't panic. They read him. She rolled down the window halfway and waited. Her voice was calm even. "Evening, officer." He leaned down slightly, scanning her face and the interior of her car. That flashlight lingered just a beat too long over her skin, over her dashboard, over her silence. "License and registration," he said flatly, skipping the pleasantries. "Sure," she said, reaching slowly for her glove compartment, narrating each move. There was something in her voice, calm, almost clinical, like she'd done this before, like she was measuring him, not the other way around. He watched her closely, too closely. There was an air of curiosity behind his detachment, like he didn't quite know what box to put her in. She wasn't nervous, wasn't angry, wasn't flustered, and that unsettled him. As she handed over the documents, her eyes didn't break from his. "Mind telling me why I was pulled over?" she asked. He paused, not long, just enough. "Failure to stop at the intersection back there." Raina tilted her head slightly. Not in protest, more like someone watching a child lie, wondering how long he'd keep it up. "I came to a full stop. 3 seconds, counted them myself." That made him blink, then smirk. Not a real smile, just the curling of someone used to being unchallenged. "You sure about that?" She didn't reply, just raised an eyebrow barely. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face, then vanished. The silence stretched heavy, and somewhere behind the officer's authority and her restraint, the air shifted. The game had begun, and Raina Morgan. She wasn't the kind of woman who ever played to lose. Detective Trent Logan stood beside the driver's window, his thumb resting lazily on the top of Raina's license. His posture was relaxed, almost theatrical, like this was just another routine traffic stop in a town where nothing serious ever happened. "From where I was sitting," he said with a dry chuckle, "you didn't come to a full stop." Raina met his gaze with a calm that wasn't defensive. It was deliberate, measured, her voice stayed level. I counted to 3, just like the book says. Logan tilted his head amused. Well, maybe next time count out loud for the cameras. He turned without waiting for a response, sauntering toward the back of her vehicle. The flashlight beam bounced along the surface like it was searching for something it already knew was there. From the shadows emerged Sergeant Rick Dalton, bulkier, louder and far less careful. He wore the smirk of a man who thought of policing as a game, and he always played to win. Pop the trunk for us, he barked, not even pretending to make it a request. Raina glanced at the rearview mirror. One breath in, one out. Then she reached calmly toward the dashboard and hit the release. Click. The trunk rose slowly. Dalton leaned in with a little too much enthusiasm, muttering to himself like a magician setting up a trick. Then, like clockwork, he straightened with a triumphant grin, holding up a clear plastic bag of white powder. Well, would you look at that? He called ladies riding dirty tonight. Raina didn't react, not visibly, but something shifted behind her eyes, something cold alert. Logan returned to her window bag in hand, shaking it slightly, like a rattle. Care to explain? She didn't even glance at the bag. Her tone stayed steady, almost clinical. That wasn't in my car. You sure? I don't carry anything I can't explain. Dalton's laugh echoed from the back. You hear that, Trent? She talks like she's in court already. Logan smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Ma'am, step out of the vehicle. Raina did slowly control, like someone who'd been through far worse and had learned how to move without wasting energy. Her hands stayed where they could see them. Her back stayed straight. As Dalton approached with the cuffs, she didn't resist. But just before her hands were pulled behind her, she said softly, almost to herself, "This isn't the first time someone's tried this." Dalton snorted. "Yeah, well, maybe it'll be the last." Metal touched skin. The cuffs clicked, closed. "You're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute," Logan announced flatly. Raina didn't respond. Instead, as they turned her toward the squad car, her eyes flicked just once across the street. There, under a flickering street lamp, mounted halfway up the pole, a city surveillance camera. Old dusty, easy to ignore. But she didn't ignore it. She looked at it and blinked once, slow and deliberate, as if marking time, as if sending a silent signal. Logan followed her gaze. "Something you want to tell us?" Raina turned her head slightly, just enough to speak without meeting his eyes. "You'll hear it eventually." Dalton opened the squad car door and nudged her in. "Lady, all you're going to hear is a judge slamming down the gavel." As the car door shut behind her, Raina leaned back against the seat. Her wrists ached slightly from the cuffs, but her pulse stayed steady. They thought they'd trapped her. They thought this was the end of the road, but they didn't know they had just stepped into her operation, not the other way around. And under the soft glow of that broken street lamp, the camera kept rolling, quietly witnessing the first crack in their perfect plan. The fluorescent lights in the station buzzed faintly, casting a cold, almost sterile glow across the beige walls and worn tile floors. It was the kind of building that hadn't been updated in years, where paint peeled at the corners and everything smelled faintly of stale coffee and old paperwork. Raina sat alone in the small interrogation room. No cuffs now, just a metal chair, a bolted-down table, and a camera blinking silently in the corner. She didn't slouch, didn't fidget. Her posture was straight, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She didn't look like someone waiting to be interrogated. She looked like someone preparing to observe, and she was. Her eyes scanned the room, not in panic, but with precision. One vent in the ceiling, 2 cameras, one active. The door had a metal bar, but the lock looked old. She made note of the coat rack in the corner, the type of clock on the wall, even the cheap plastic folder left on the floor, probably by accident. Every detail mattered. The door creaked open. Detective Trent Logan walked in, his swagger unmistakable, and dropped a file on the table like it was a final verdict. "You've had some time to think," he said, pulling out the chair opposite her. "Want to tell me what you were doing with that bag in your trunk?" Raina blinked once, then said nothing. Logan leaned in, resting his forearms on the table. "Look, you seem smart, smarter than most of the people we drag in here. So maybe you slipped up. Maybe it's not yours. Maybe someone made you hold it, but unless you start talking, you're going to take the fall for all of it." Still, she said nothing. Just a calm, steady gaze watching him. Not afraid, not rattled. Just waiting. Logan shifted slightly, the silence wearing on him faster than he expected. He tapped the folder. "You know how this works, right? Charges stack, intent to distribute, possibly trafficking. That's time, lady, years." Raina tilted her head slowly. She looked at the folder, then back at him. "You think if you say it enough times it becomes real?" Logan's jaw tightened. He opened the folder and shoved a photo across the table, an image of the bag Dalton had pulled from her trunk. This is Rio. She didn't look at the photo. Her eyes were on the camera above his shoulder. So's that. He paused, followed her gaze, then smirked. You think someone's watching? This isn't TV. Nobody's coming to save you. Raina leaned forward just an inch, not enough to seem aggressive, but enough to remind him she was present, engaged. No one needs to save me. You're the one building a lie you can't back out of. There was no venom in her voice, just clarity. Logan stood abruptly, knocking his chair slightly. We'll see how calm you are in a few hours. He stormed out, slamming the door. Across the hallway in the main bullpen, Sergeant Rick Dalton stood with a coffee in one hand and his ego in the other. He laughed loudly, retelling the story of the arrest to two other officers, exaggerating every detail. Man, she barely blinked. Cold as stone. You know the type. Smart mouth, no street smarts. The others chuckled along. No one questioned her. At the far end of the station, behind a bank of outdated monitors, Officer Josh Ramirez sat watching the feed from the interrogation room. He was young, new to the force, still trying to figure out who he was supposed to be in this place. But as he watched Raina sit silently under that harsh light, hands still posture perfect, he felt something twist in his gut. She didn't look scared. She didn't look guilty. She looked aware. She's too calm, he murmured to himself, too collected. He zoomed in slightly on the camera feed, watched the way her eyes tracked every movement, watched the way she didn't flinch when Logan raised his voice. Something wasn't adding up, and Ramirez, whether he was ready or not, was starting to feel the pull of a question he couldn't ignore. What if she's not the problem? What if she's the one who sees everything they're pretending not to? He leaned back in his chair, uneasy. The station felt a little colder than before, and Raina, still alone in that little room, didn't move an inch. She didn't have to, because the game hadn't started with her. But it just might end with her. The holding cell was colder than it looked. Cement walls, a steel bench, and a silence so deep it had its own weight. A single flickering fluorescent bulb buzzed above her, casting a pale and flattering light that never seemed to stay still. Raina Morgan sat on the bench with her back against the wall, her arms folded lightly across her chest. She hadn't spoken since they locked the door, hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't protested. She was waiting, but not idly. Her right hand slowly moved to her left wrist, rubbing it as though working out stiffness from the cuffs that had been removed earlier. But the movement was precise, rhythmic, not a nervous tick, a signal. She found the seam just under the cuff of her sleeve and pressed gently 3 taps, the last one firm. Click! Hidden in the hem of her jacket, a jacket no one thought to confiscate, was a small, pressure-sensitive trigger. Standard CIA protocol for field operatives facing compromised cover. She'd only used it once before, and that time it saved her life. The signal wouldn't say much. Just a burst, a ping, enough for her team to know she was in custody but alive, still playing the long game. She leaned her head back, eyes half closed, breathing evenly. Let's see who gets here first, she thought. My team, or the storm. For a moment, her mind drifted, unusual for her. She remembered the first time she sat in a cell like this. Not in Virginia, somewhere colder. Concrete underfoot. Language she didn't speak on the walls. Back then, she had been afraid. Green knew she didn't know if help was coming. She smiled faintly now, remembering that version of herself, scared but unbreakable. That woman never really left her, just a hallway away. Officer Josh Ramirez sat in front of his monitor in the records room, shoulders tense, heart uncertain. He hadn't meant to go digging, but something about this arrest about her kept gnawing at him. He'd seen a lot of people come through in the few months since he joined the force. Most were loud, defensive, or confused. Raina. She was collected. He pulled up her file again. Name: Raina Morgan. Occupation: independent consultant. Employment history: sparse, a single note, self-employed. No agency affiliations, no tax record, no LinkedIn, Facebook, or even DMV renewal for the past 4 years. He frowned. That wasn't just private, that was erased. Ramirez clicked through a few more tabs. No criminal history, no medical, no rental agreement. It was like she'd materialized out of nowhere. Nobody's that clean, he murmured. He leaned back in his chair, staring at her ID photo on the screen. There was something behind her eyes, even in that static image, like she knew something he didn't, like she was watching him. A quiet breath left his chest. He wasn't supposed to question things like this, especially not with senior officers like Logan and Dalton running the show. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling. He minimized the screen and looked over at the surveillance feed. Raina hadn't moved in several minutes. She sat like a statue, head tilted slightly, eyes unfocused but not asleep. Just calculating. Back in the cell, Raina exhaled, long, silent, deliberate. This station didn't scare her. The silence didn't suffocate her. It centered her, because silence in her world wasn't weakness. It was preparation. And tonight, the quiet wasn't hers to fear. It was there. Josh Ramirez sat alone in the back records room, lit only by the dull glow of the computer screen and the flickering light above his head. The low hum of the station buzzed faintly through the walls, phones ringing, boots, walking laughter echoing from the break room. But it all sounded distant now, muffled, like he wasn't really there anymore. His eyes were locked on the screen. A new search query blinked at the top of the department database. Officer Trent Logan, arrest history, last 24 months. He hesitated. His finger hovered over the return key. This wasn't what rookies were supposed to do, but his gut, quiet and persistent, kept whispering, something's wrong, you know it. He hit enter. The list populated quickly, line after line of arrest records, each one tied to Logan. Over 100 names, he clicked open a dozen at random. The pattern jumped out almost immediately. Traffic stop, minor violation of search initiated, unmarked bag, discovered suspect arrested on felony possession. And over again, young black men, some just teenagers, a few Latinx, rarely white. Josh's jaw tightened. He opened another file. A boy, 17 years old, pulled over for a cracked taillight, claimed he was headed to church choir rehearsal. No prior record, but there it was again, bag containing controlled substance found in vehicle trunk. Same wording, same phrasing, same officers, Logan and Dalton, convicted 5 years. Josh leaned back slowly, breath catching in his throat. He rubbed his temples, trying to reason with himself. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe they were just good at their jobs. Maybe the suspects really had drugs on them. But the words in the reports, they were too clean, too rehearsed, like a script. His cursor hovered over the field labeled Arresting Officer Statement. The language was almost identical across multiple cases. Subject displayed, nervous behavior, consented to vehicle search, discovered bag was in plain view. Josh muttered aloud without meaning to. No way this is all real. He felt sick. He joined the force to help people, to do good. His parents had been proud. His mom cried when he graduated from the academy. We need good cops, she'd said, people who care. And now, this, he stared at the boy's file again. The mugshot, the sentence, the date just 4 months ago. He clenched his fist, then let it go. How many of these people are sitting in cells right now because of them? The question hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. He turned back to the surveillance feed. Raina was still in her cell, unmoving, focused, unbothered. For a moment, their eyes met through the camera, his screen to her ceiling lens. It felt like she knew he was looking, knew what he was seeing, knew what came next. Josh looked away, heart pounding, a mix of shame, guilt, and something deeper, clarity. He was no longer just watching a woman behind bars. He was watching a system cracking and realizing it wasn't built to protect people like her or people like him. He opened a blank notepad file on his computer, started copying arrest report IDs. He wasn't sure what he'd do with them yet, but for the first time since he put on the uniform, he stopped thinking about rules and started thinking about justice. Detective Trent Logan leaned against the break room counter, his coffee untouched, eyes sharp and narrowed. He wasn't laughing like earlier. Not anymore. Across the room, Ramirez sat stiffly at the edge of a table, pretending to scroll through his phone, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. He hadn't said a word since shift change. Logan stepped closer, his voice low, quiet enough not to draw attention, but with enough edge to cut. You've been looking at her phone, though. Josh blinked, swallowed. What? Logan didn't blink. Raina Morgan, don't act dumb. I saw your access log. A silence settled between them. I was just reviewing the intake notes. Right, Logan said flatly. That's not your job, rookie. He stepped even closer now, eyes locked. I know how this place works. You stick to your lane, you stay safe, you start poking around, especially where you don't belong well. Mistakes happen. Josh didn't answer, but something in his expression cracked the mask of obedience, the illusion of respect. Logan smiled, but it didn't reach his eye. Good talk. He walked away. Miles outside the station, in a secure operations center tucked beneath a nondescript office building, 3 people surrounded a blinking terminal. On the screen, a signal, brief, precise, encrypted. One woman, Agent Camille Rhodes, stood with arms crossed, her face stone still as she watched the data stream. Signal from Morgan confirmed, a tech reported. Location, Stafford County Sheriff's Office. Camille exhaled. That's the one with Logan, right? Confirmed, also cross-linked with other flagged officers in pending review. Camille stayed silent for a moment. She's in hostile ground, one agent said. We should extract her. Not yet, Camille replied. We move too soon, we lose the case. We need them to show their hand. She knows what she's doing. They all looked back to the screen. A red dot blinked once, then again. In the holding cell, Raina shifted slightly. She'd heard the voices through the wall. Not the words, but the tone. She knew Logan had started circling. Her wrists still bore the faint impression of the cuffs. She examined them briefly, then brought her left hand to her right palm. Using her thumbnail, slow, careful, she etched 4 words into her own skin. They plant evidence I have proof. The letters were shallow, just enough to mark. Not enough to bleed. She leaned forward slightly, hands resting loosely in her lap, just visible to anyone paying attention. And she waited. A few minutes later, Ramirez walked the hallway with a stainless steel tray in hand. Standard station meal, soggy fries, and something gray, passed off as meat. He stopped outside her cell. Dinner. No reply. He slid the tray through the slot and was about to walk off until his eyes caught something. Her palm. She didn't move, didn't look up, just rested her hand gently on the edge of the tray. Exposed. He froze. Read it once, then again. They plant evidence I have proof. His breath caught. He looked up. Her eyes met his calm steady. She didn't nod, didn't speak, but her message was clear. Now do something. Ramirez stood frozen for a beat too long. Then someone called his name from down the hall. He stepped back, clearing his throat, and walked away quickly. Tray empty, head spinning. In the cell behind him, Raina let her hand fall back into her lap. Not dramatic, not urgent, just certain, because now it wasn't just her move anymore. It was his, and he was running out of time. The glow from the computer screen painted Josh Ramirez's face in cold blue light. He sat motionless, the words on the screen pulsing in silence. To internal intel, FBI GUVO, subject systemic corruption. Urgent. Officers here are planting evidence. I don't know who else to turn to. This isn't just one case. It's bigger than that. Please help. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, a fine tremble running through them. His mouth felt dry. The hum of the records room filled the silence, and yet everything around him seemed to still. He thought about the 17-year-old boy, thought about the identical arrest reports, thought about the palm of a woman's hand steady and marked with truth. He pressed send. The screen blinked once, the message disappeared, but something inside him had shifted quietly but irreversibly. He moved down the hallway slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, only that he needed to see her again, to look her in the eye and let her know he wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. The holding cell was quiet, the air inside dim and cool. Raina Morgan sat in the same position she'd held for hours back, straight eyes focused ahead, not tired, not broken. She looked up as Ramirez approached, but her expression didn't change. No surprise, no hope, just a waiting calm. He stopped in front of the bars, hesitant, hands in his pockets, then out again. The badge on his chest suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. You're not what they say. The words came out softer than he intended, almost apologetic. She tilted her head slightly, watching him, not judgmental, but careful. I've seen what they do, he continued. I used to think they were just tough cops, good instincts. But it's the same story over and over, and I didn't want to admit what that meant. He swallowed hard, but now I can't unsee it. A pause stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Are you military, Chow? The question slipped out like a confession. She didn't blink, just looked at him a long moment, then said, I serve something bigger. Her voice was steady, grounded. But right now, I don't need you to salute. I need you to believe. Ramirez lowered his eyes, thinking of his family, his oath, his training, everything he thought he understood about justice. He looked back up. I sent a report, internal FBI inbox. Everything I've seen so far. Raina gave no visible reaction, but something in the air between them shifted lighter, clearer. I didn't include your name, he added. She finally spoke again, voice quieter now. You did more than most ever do. He exhaled, tension slipping from his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he felt like a human being inside that uniform. I don't know what happens next. She leaned forward slightly, voice gentle but resolute. No one does. That's why it's called courage. Ramirez nodded once. A small movement, but it carried weight. As he turned to go, she stopped him with a final word. Thank you, Officer Ramirez. He looked back. This time he didn't look away. You're welcome. In a darkened control room several miles away, a soft alert pinged across a secure FBI terminal. Agent Camille Rhodes stepped forward, eyes narrowing as she read the incoming tip. The sender was anonymous, but the truth, loud and clear. She turned to her team. Morgan's not alone anymore. And just like that, the clock began to move. Faster. It started like any other morning. Coffee brewing in the break room. Laughter echoing down the hallway. Rick Dalton, as usual, held court by the vending machine, cracking crude jokes and puffing his chest like the station was his personal kingdom. Trent Logan leaned against the counter. Arms crossed, a faint smirk on his face. His world, as far as he knew, was still in order. Until the front door swung open. The air changed instantly, like a storm had stepped into the room. 4 agents entered in crisp black suits, their movements smooth, coordinated. Not loud, not aggressive, but final. At the front of the group was Agent Camille Rhodes, tall, poised, and quiet as a loaded gun. Her badge flashed briefly, just long enough to stop every conversation mid-sentence. Agent Rhodes, FBI. We're here on an internal corruption probe. Dead silence. Dalton straightened. Logan's smile disappeared. The sergeant behind the front desk blinked twice, then cleared his throat. Do you have paperwork for this? Rhodes didn't even look at him. We do. But first I need access to your holding cells, officer intake logs, and arrest reports for the last 12 months. Dalton stepped forward, voice rising, just slightly trying to regain control. What the hell is this? What probe? Rhodes didn't answer him. She simply turned to the tech agent beside her and gave a single nod. The agent rolled in a portable monitor on wheels already powered up. She tapped a few keys and a video feed filled the screen. Everyone in the room turned to watch. Grainy black and white footage, the inside of a vehicle. Raina's SUV, and then Logan and Dalton caught on hidden surveillance. One holding the bag, the other lifting the trunk, their voices barely audible but unmistakable. Just tuck it in. Right there. Yeah, like it was always there. Dalton's face went pale. Logan took half a step back. The entire bullpen was silent. Then Dalton exploded. This is entrapment. She set us up. This is illegal surveillance. Rhodes turned to him, eyes level, voice calm as a blade. No, that's justice. Another agent approached from the hallway. Ma'am, holding cell confirmed. Subject is safe, cooperating. Rhodes nodded, then looked straight at Logan. You're both going to need lawyers. Logan opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in years, he looked small. Dalton clenched his fist, face red, voice trembling. You think this is going to stick? You think some edited video means anything? It's not just the video, Rhodes replied. It's the records, the patterns, the victims. She handed him a printed stack of reports, each one marked with familiar names. Patterns. Repetition, the kind you couldn't fake. Josh Ramirez stood off to the side, heart pounding. He hadn't been called out, but Rhodes's gaze passed over him briefly, and she gave him the smallest nod, acknowledgement, validation, and something more, respect. In the back, Raina sat in her cell, still motionless, but she didn't need to move. She felt it, the ripple. She had played her part, planted the truth where they'd least expected, and now the system so used to silence was finally starting to speak. The conference room at Stafford County Sheriff's Office had never held this much silence. The walls, once lined with generic commendation plaques and faded recruitment posters, now bore the weight of something far more important, reckoning. Agent Camille Rhodes stood at the front of the room, a folder in her hand, her voice even and controlled. But what she said next landed like a hammer blow. Miss Raina Morgan is not just a civilian. She's a federal undercover officer, clearance level 3, signed to investigate systemic racial targeting and fabrication of evidence within this department. No one moved. No one breathed. Time itself seemed to freeze in the seconds that followed. Ramirez felt his knees weaken. Dalton dropped into the nearest chair like the wind had been knocked out of him. Logan didn't sit. He didn't move. He just stood there staring at Rhodes like he'd misunderstood her, like the truth couldn't possibly be the truth. No, he muttered, that's not. She tricked us. Rhodes raised her eyebrows, calm as ever. She observed, documented, and waited for you to be yourself. The words cut deeper than shouting ever could. Dalton turned to Logan, eyes wide and frantic. You said she was just some mouthy consultant. She looked like what Rhodes interrupted coldly. A black woman driving alone at night. Is that all it took? Dalton's lips parted, but no words came out. Rhodes stepped aside, and the door behind her opened. Raina Morgan stepped into the room slowly, silently, still wearing the same clothes she was arrested in. But now every inch of her carried weight, command presence. No badge on her chest. She didn't need one. The room parted around her like water. Ramirez's eyes filled with tears, not just from relief, but shame. His voice caught in his throat. He looked down, then back at her. She gave him a single nod, forgiving, grateful. Then she turned her gaze to Logan and Dalton. They looked at her like she was someone entirely new. Because she was, Logan tried again, desperate. You were playing us from the start. Raina tilted her head, calm as ever. You were playing yourselves. I just let the camera roll. Dalton dropped his head into his hands, elbows resting on the table. His body sagged under the weight of what was coming, of what he knew was already true. Rhodes turned to Raina. Anything you'd like to say? Raina looked at the room slowly, intentionally, then said just one sentence. Some truths demand to be seen. Her voice was soft, but it rang out with the clarity of judgment. Outside the room, through the station's old windows, the sky was turning. What had started as another quiet morning in Virginia had become something else entirely. A crack in the system, a name clear, and a reckoning long overdue. The station felt colder after they were gone. Trent Logan and Rick Dalton were let out in handcuffs just before dawn. No perp walk, no cameras. But every officer in the building watched in silence as the men who once ruled these halls were marched down the same corridors they'd weaponized for years. By mid-morning, FBI agents filled the precinct, pulling case files, interviewing staff, and unlocking dusty drawers. Long thought untouchable, the commander's office was sealed by noon. A dozen past convictions were flagged for immediate review, and the badge that once carried quiet immunity now weighed heavier than ever. Josh Ramirez kept his head down. For the first few days, some officers gave him cold shoulders, others whispered. A few told him to watch his back. But the community, they saw him. He wasn't the rookie anymore. People showed up outside the station, quiet but present, black mothers, veterans, church elders, young men in hoodies who used to be too afraid to file complaints. They didn't say much, just nodded at him, and that was enough. 3 weeks later, the leaves had started to change. In a small park just outside town, Raina Morgan sat on a wooden bench beneath a canopy of amber and gold. A paper cup of coffee warmed her hands as she looked out over the still water of the pond nearby. The quiet didn't feel tense anymore. It felt earned. Josh approached slowly, hands in his pockets. He hadn't expected her to respond when he reached out. But she did told him to meet her here when the wind starts to shift. He sat beside her without speaking at first. The breeze rustled the trees above them. Ducks drifted across the pond without urgency. How's the station, she asked, still looking forward. Different, not perfect, but quieter, more honest. She nodded slightly. That's something. A pause, then she turned to face him. You made the harder choice, Josh. That's rare. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. I didn't know what I was doing. You didn't have to. You just had to do it. They shared a brief silence, comfortable this time. So what now, he asked. Raina's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, no urgency in her eyes, just inevitability. Another assignment, he asked, half smiling. She stood adjusting her coat, always. Ramirez rose as well, unsure whether to shake her hand or say something profound. But she saved him the trouble. Keep your eyes open, and when the system leans too hard in one direction, she paused, meeting his eyes one last time. Be the weight that pulls it back. Then she turned and walked away. Steady quiet, the wind catching her coat as she moved toward the path. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting long golden light across the bench where she'd sat and the empty path ahead. Ramirez stood still for a moment, then smiled, just as he realized didn't always roar. Sometimes it walked softly through broken systems and left the doors open behind it. Some truths are quiet but powerful, and some people like Raina remind us that justice begins with just one brave choice. If this story meant something to you, please like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more powerful stories like this. Your support helps us keep creating meaningful content that matters. Thank you for watching and for standing on the side of truth.